So I've gone around taking photographs of these various sites, selected some, and I reproduced them at in this case, 8 by 12s. And then I slice, dice, chop, and cut and use very linear pieces, usually so squares, long rectangular strips, to construct a visual piece. And behind me there are two pieces that are samples of the kind of thing that I do with this particular type of collage. I like the idea of two competing or differing ideas being expressed and kind of coming out, where you may see in one area one may become more prominent and you can see what the whole photographic piece might have been, and in another it might be the opposite. Anyways, it's somewhat like doing a picture puzzle. I'm putting the pieces together. And because and this is the one kind of collage I do other kinds of collages where, I mean, this is very precise, very linear. I do others where I am ripping and tearing, and I will use magazine color and do landscapes, but it's a ripping and tearing process, and I work from plein air watercolor sketches that I do, and then express them in this other medium of collage using magazine color. I also do collage where I am using image and pieces of magazine, particularly to do cityscapes, and again, very linear, very precise. I've used, in my sort of a comment on our changing society, the use of cell phones as a skyline and cityscape, or the use of cosmetic and perfume bottles, fragrance bottles as a cityscape. I like to do art that tries to deal with concepts and ideas and convey something to the viewer. It isn't enough for me to do a visual image, just a decorative piece. There has to be something else, something that engages the viewer, something that engages the viewer's mind. I mean, even if it's just straight marks or something on the paper, something makes the viewer say, well, what is this? What is this about? What do I see in there? So, I mean, there are pieces on the walls over here where I've taken my proofs from printmaking or goofs from printmaking and cut them up, in geometrical shapes, and then piece them together. And within each geometrical shape, there are remnants of the original image from my proof making, but the eye and the mind gets drawn trying to figure out, well, what was that, and what did that have? And so there's an engaging process with the viewer, and I like that, because I like, personally, when I look at art, it isn't enough for it to be pretty or beautiful. It must, grab my mind and kind of make me think about things, and that's hopefully what I can accomplish with my art. I don't know, missionary zeal or whatever. I must preach. I must tell you. I find that, inspiration for pieces come from different sources. And materials. Certain very common materials, like I've used stamps in these landscapes. But stamps, particularly older stamps, are little art pieces in their own right. Originally they were true little etchings. And when you rub them, you can feel the lines of the ink and that. And then some artists sat and created this little etching to make stamps. The and the other is with stamps, you get a physical, you know where they're from. It tells you what country. And so using that particular material allows me to make a comment about the piece. And these two pieces, particularly after 9/11, we became incredibly aware of borders, and that there was this, we have barriers between countries, and so I've used the stamps to portray Canada and the U.S. and from landscape, you know, this is U.S. territory, this is Canadian territory, so I'll use my stamps to portray that. So there's a multitude, and yet it's basically a landscape, but there's this other stuff in there too. So I have one there with just 1-inch squares of color randomly placed. I was sitting watching TV one night, and the cable, I wanted to watch TV one evening, went home, got home, put on the television, and the cable was on the fritz, and all you could see were little pixels over the screen. And I really wanted to watch TV that night. So I phoned the cable company, and of course, you know, they're having difficulty, so you're on hold, and I'm sitting there with this phone and watching this. And, you know, as I'm sitting there, I'm becoming real, you know, you're watching the color and the changes, and, you know, it's constantly changing. And I think, my God, that's beautiful. Those little squares of color and moving around, there's this incredibly beautiful thing here. There is beauty here. And so it inspired me to do pictures with just squares of color that you don't know what they are, but they're just there, and hopefully they portray that sense of beauty. And yet it was inspired by an event, and I've done several of those, and again, they're very meticulously done. You have to cut the pieces the right size and then cut them up smaller and glue them. And in many ways I see art fundamentally as the division of space, and how one divides that space, and with what material one uses, you create some kind of an image that communicates. I do printmaking, and compared to doing collage, which is very immediate, printmaking is much more a process before one gets a finished product, before one gets a piece, where as you're doing collage, that's very immediate. I mean, with printmaking, you're creating a plate, and you work and manipulate that plate, and then you then ink it, and you work with the colors and see what works. But so there's a production of always of proofs before you get that final image. And by the time you get the final image, I mean, it's almost anticlimactic, because you've gone through all these steps and processes, and plus, you know, with a print, you end up with a piece that has borders usually, and different kind of process, but again, but quite methodical. Can be spontaneous too, but there's much more involved in producing a print. It's less direct than it is for collage. I do prints because it's what I myself felt that I could afford to buy when I was younger. I've been doing art. I've been a practicing artist for the last 12 years. You know, it wasn't what I expected to do with this end of my life. But as a person who always enjoyed the visual arts, I didn't feel I could buy originals, but I could afford to buy a limited edition print, a print done by a printmaker. And so that's what I tended to buy and have. So I, in turn, it makes sense that given that I've bought and purchased and enjoyed prints, that I should make prints. So, you know, those are kind of the rationales of where I came at this. As to the materials and the use of materials, well, kind of the most commonplace things can be used as materials, and unexpected things. I mean, I have some ideas yet for very unexpected materials in terms of creating art, or various kinds of techniques for using these materials and things. So we'll see. One of the good things that they taught us in those 3 years of art school, that when you have an idea, write it down. And I've always done that. Not because, well, sometimes I think the ideas are very brilliant, but when one has ideas, and a book of ideas, one is never lacking for what to do. One doesn't sit down with a blank and say, oh, what am I going to do now? I have a lifetime of ideas there, which I doubt I will ever do all of them, but I'm not lacking for what to do, or concepts that I want to portray, or how I like to portray them. I may lack the skills to portray some of them, but what you find with doing art, it's practice. It's doing it over and over and over again. I mean, doing these kinds of pieces, you know, I've done probably 8 or 9 of the larger ones and smaller ones. And the more I do them, the better I get at doing them technically. The straighter the line I can cut. And again, it's practice. And so it's like any artist, you know. You're not just born with talent. To make that talent work, it's the doing, it's the repetition, it's doing it over and over. And so the other ironies is, despite having some interest in art, I couldn't have done this at the front end of my life. I had no discipline. So the practice, the working at it would have been tough. Where coming at it this way, you know, you can see the value, and you have the patience to do it over and try it over and over again. So that for me has been my experience.